Good morning and welcome to Urban Planning Meeting for May 25th, 2021. And I'm going to begin with a roll call. Councillor Beiger.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Katarina.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Councillor Henderson.
Morning.
And I believe we're joined by a few more of my colleagues. I saw Councillor Cartmel. Good morning.
Good morning.
Councillor McKean.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning. I see no one else, but if you are, please let me know. Regardless, it's enough to get going. So I'll need a motion for the adoption of the agenda, and I'm going to Councillor Beiger.
Madam Chair, I would like to move adoption of agenda for today's meeting.
Thank you very much. Seeing no comments, can I have a motion to, let's vote on the motion, please. Please vote.
Yes.
We have all the votes, thank you.
Thank you. Display the vote. Thank you, and that is carried unanimously. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, and I think I saw you as well. Now I need a motion for the approval of the minutes. Councillor Katarina.
Madam Chair, I'll move the minutes from May 11th, 2021 Urban Planning Committee.
Thank you. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, would you please vote?
Yes. Sorry, I'm still getting my system online here.
Yes, for me as well. I think my e-token expired.
We have all the votes.
Thank you, and display the vote. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We have no protocol items to debate. And now it's time for a selection of items for debate. And Councillor Zadok has indicated that he does not need 6-2 selected unless someone else needs it selected. Councillor Henderson.
I'll select 6-1.
Okay. Okay, and then Councillor Beiger, could you move what's left, which is 6-2?
6-2.
Just move it.
Okay, moved, please.
All right. Please vote on 6-2.
Yes.
We're just waiting for the mayor's vote. Perfect, we have it. We have all the votes.
And display the vote. And that is carried as well. Thank you very much. Councillor Henderson, can I go to you for a request to speak?
Happy to. Let me just pull it up. And I will move that we hear from the following speakers. Ian Phillips from Shore Communications, Bonnie Fermaniak, Jill Robertson, Dustin Beiger, Mick Graham from IDEA, Jeff Bertram from EPCOR, Guillaume Bechon from EPCOR, to answer questions only. Jocelyn Hodgson from ATCO, Don Tolsma, Canadian Home Builders Association, Edmonton Region, Christine Kowalczyk from the Edmonton River Valley Conservation Coalition, Haroon Alley, Charles Richmond from Sierra Club Canada Foundation, Edmonton, and Mariah Samji from IDEA.
Thank you. That's all that I have as well. Could you please vote on hearing from those speakers?
Yes.
We have all the votes.
Thank you. And display the vote. Wonderful. And that is carried unanimously as well. Well, we don't need any time specific. I'm going to ask if there are any councillor inquiries. I have one, seeing no one else does. And I'll read it now. Would administration provide an update on the 137th Avenue on-ramps to the Anthony Henday Drive, including preparation work by the provincial government, cost estimates, and where it fits within the city's infrastructure? Okay, so we received that. So now it's time to go to 6.1, and I believe there's a presentation. We'll have the presentation, and then we'll hear from speakers. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Chairperson, committee members, members of council. We're pleased to have this opportunity to present the report CR 6801, the proposed draft bylaw for tree preservation and protection in Edmonton. With me today for the presentation, Brian Simpson, our branch manager of Parks and Road Services, along with Phil Harrett, the Director of Infrastructure Operations, and Travis Kennedy, the General Supervisor of Open Space Operations. We also have representatives from the Law, Development Services, and Community Standards branches to answer any questions following the presentation and hearing from our speakers. Our intention today is to provide committee with an update on progress and an opportunity for feedback on the proposed next steps and the draft bylaw. This report presents the current context and challenges with tree protection in Edmonton, findings from the jurisdictional scan, results from public and stakeholder engagement, findings from the permit pricing research, and recommendations from the service design review. Next slide, please. Trees are a vital resource that connect people to nature, each other, and their community. The City of Edmonton's urban forest consists of approximately 380,000 boulevard and open space trees and over 3,000 hectares of forested natural areas. They play a critical role in the urban environment, including capturing carbon and street-level pollutants, creating more oxygen, providing shade and protection, as well as natural habitats. They also provide a long-term aesthetic and health benefit to our communities. A sustainable and healthy urban forest supports Connect Edmonton's 4 strategic goals of healthy city, vibrant urban spaces, regional prosperity, and climate resilience. It also aligns with the city plan's commitment to be greener as we grow, with a target of 0 net greenhouse gas emissions per person. In the spirit of working collectively with Edmontonians, as well as achieving the outcomes of the city plan, we are proposing a new bylaw to protect one of our most valuable resources, trees, especially our mature trees. Mature trees require time and care to grow. They provide the largest ecosystem benefits, but they only account for 15% of the total tree inventory in Edmonton. When mature trees are damaged or lost, their many benefits are degraded or absent for decades. A strong tree protection mechanism, like a bylaw and permitting process, is essential for long-term sustainability of the urban forest. I'll now pass the presentation over to Travis Kennedy, who will walk you through some of the specifics of the bylaw and the work to date.
Thank you, Gord. Recognizing the need for stronger tree protection measures, at the July 5th, 2017 Urban Planning Committee meeting, a motion was made for administration to review existing bylaws and policies and return with recommendations for tree protection, including a potential tree protection bylaw. In the interim, tree protection requirements were added to certain types of on-street construction and maintenance permits and rezoning application. In August 2019, administration completed a jurisdictional review to understand tree protection and preservation mechanisms used by other municipalities across North America. Towards the end of 2019 and throughout 2020, extensive public and stakeholder engagement was conducted. After completing a service design review and permit pricing study earlier this year, we're here today to present our findings and the proposed bylaw for preservation and protection of city trees. There's currently no proactive tree protection or preservation bylaw in effect in the City of Edmonton. A review of existing city bylaws revealed that the current tools for tree protection are more reactive than proactive, and enforcement happens only after that damage has already occurred. The city's corporate tree management policy lays out tree preservation guidelines for how to plan work around trees, but there's no way to ensure compliance as they are merely guidelines that cannot be enforced. The interim tree protection measures that were introduced in 2017 through OSCAM and rezoning applications, while helpful, only allow the city to capture a small percentage of work activities around city trees and exclude other potential projects that may impact a city tree. Even if tree preservation or protection plans are submitted through these processes, there's no bylaw requiring strict adherence to these plans. Despite these measures, city trees are still damaged or lost. Soil compaction from vehicles, heavy equipment, and storage of construction materials over tree roots can decline the overall health and resilience of the trees. Between January 2019 and April 2021 alone, the city identified 196 work sites that were left in poor condition with different levels of damage to city trees. Next slide. Let's go 2 slides. Next slide. And next slide. An in-depth review of tree protection measures in 11 North American municipalities was conducted, all of which 7 were Canadian. The review indicated that all cities regulate, maintain, and enforce tree protection differently. Some municipalities have only 1 or 2 relevant bylaws, while others rely on several bylaws and permitting processes, including for trees on private property. In most municipalities, the measures in place are more reactive than preventative. Regulations typically involve permits for tree removal and enforcement for damages to trees. Of the few who have preventative measures, tree protection requirements are built into the development, building, or hoarding permits. A lack of resources in bylaw enforcement was cited by nearly all municipalities as the biggest challenge for tree protection. Public education and outreach was perceived as key for building public support for tree preservation programs, which in turn helps increase bylaw compliance. Next slide, please. Following the jurisdictional review, administration drafted some preliminary ideas for a tree protection bylaw and began public and stakeholder engagement in fall 2019. The public was invited to provide their input through an online survey and 3 public drop-in sessions. There was a clear desire for increased education and engagement opportunities around how to protect and preserve trees. Edmontonians who responded to the survey showed strong support for having a public tree bylaw and were interested to see more accountability for damages or loss of trees. The public emphasized on ensuring there is enough enforcement to administer any future bylaw. The public wants to see more stringent protection measures for trees in our natural areas and in the river valley. Next slide, please. Administration also conducted 3 stakeholder workshops as part of the larger public engagement initiative. Participants at all 3 stakeholder workshops emphasized the importance of protecting trees and having simplicity and clarity in any future bylaw. Environmental groups emphasized the need for consistency and how the bylaw will be enforced, higher fines for infractions and extending the bylaw to include damages to private trees. Industry stakeholders indicated interest in having tree protection looped into existing permitting processes in the city, such as development permits, and having incentives for those who already protect trees. Both industry and utility stakeholders focused on the need for flexibility around permitting and tree protection to ensure that the requirements are not overly restrictive, time-consuming, and costly. Soon after the formal engagement was complete, we were hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. The project timelines were impacted, but administration continued conducting virtual meetings with stakeholders to refine the proposed bylaw and permit process. Pricing research was also conducted to understand user perception and attitudes on potential permit fee options, where many felt there should be no permit fee and that enforcing the bylaw with higher fines should be sufficient. There were concerns about the additional costs and time that will result from having to apply for a permit and meeting the requirements for developing a protection or preservation plan. There were questions about whether the city has the resources to implement, review, and approve a large volume of plans and permit applications. Next slide, please. Based on these findings and current challenges with tree protection, administration has developed a draft public tree bylaw for preservation and protection of trees located on city land. As per the proposed bylaw, a tree permit will be required whenever work is occurring within 5 meters of a boulevard and open space tree, or within 10 meters of a natural stand. Work has been defined to mean construction, demolition, excavation, or laydown activities, i.e. storage, or vehicular access, other than on roadways, driveways, or improved trails. A tree permit must be obtained by submitting a tree preservation or protection plan to the city, which will be reviewed and approved by a City of Edmonton urban forester. The city recognizes that there are organizations that are providing adequate tree protection and currently consult with city foresters. There are, however, many incidents of tree damage or loss where concrete action cannot be taken due to lack of stronger measures. This bylaw will allow administration to hold parties accountable for both obtaining a tree permit prior to beginning work and assuring work is conducted in accordance with approved tree preservation or protection plans at all times. It will also promote proper planning and creative techniques for working around trees and enable the city to better monitor and track recurring damages. The intent is not to prevent people from working around trees, but to encourage a more careful, thoughtful approach to preserve and protect those trees. Next slide, please. Administration has conducted internal and external reviews of our existing permitting processes and have concluded that a novel tree permit is essential to minimize red tape and ensure the application process for other city permits, such as OSCAM and development permits, will not be held up. Integrating the tree permit process with existing permit processes will allow parallel applications to occur without slowing down review timelines for applications. A service design review of the tree permit process was conducted, which generated 16 opportunities across short, medium, and long term. Of these, 5 opportunities have been identified for the launch of the permit. This includes potentially developing fast tracking or recognition programs to encourage tree protection, building easier to understand tutorials, visual guides, and templates as part of onboarding, an integrated application that includes self-serve capabilities for tracking progress, and an intuitive and simple online application process. Lastly, clearly defined payment process roles and responsibilities. The tree permit will also have special provisions such as annual or blanket permits for emergency and routine infrastructure maintenance work around trees, including, but not limited to, emergency repairs, preventative line maintenance, and vegetation clearing for surveillance. Next slide, please. A successful bylaw and tree permit will require resources to initiate and sustain. While some costs like technology can be absorbed within the existing operating budget, other program costs will require additional operating funds. This includes additional enforcement capacity to ensure compliance with the new bylaw, additional permit review and site inspection capacity to manage the permitting program and ensure a quick turnaround. Based on committee's feedback today, administration will return to council this year for a formal approval of the bylaw, funding request, and proposed permit application fee. Future steps will also include using recommendations from the service design review and a GBA Plus list to set up the online application process, continue working with stakeholders to finalize the permit application process, permit fee, and supporting guidelines, create education materials and templates for tree preservation and protection plans, develop an integrated marketing and communication strategy for public and stakeholder awareness. I'll hand it back over to Gord.
Thank you, Travis. Next slide, please. So we want to emphasize that we understand that a new bylaw and process will require more effort from stakeholders, businesses, and everyone that's doing work near city trees. This will result in additional responsibility, but it is also the opportunity for us to be leaders in preserving our urban forest and to redefine how we value our tree assets. This is a step forward in the right direction, and it is going to take a community effort and commitment, but the benefit will last for generations. Our goal is not to create more roadblocks, but to work with Edmontonians to protect our tree canopy. Trees are different from any other infrastructure that we have or maintain. A tree takes a significant amount of time and effort to grow to a healthy, mature stage so that our future generations can reap its benefits. The value of a mature tree cannot be replaced immediately by planting a new young tree. Through this bylaw, we are making it a priority to protect what we have rooted in Edmonton. This wonderful Arbor Day photo taken years ago shows students collecting their seedlings, which are now some of the mature trees that we see across Edmonton today. The city, as a steward, is committed to enhancing, preserving, and protecting its urban forest and ensuring that we continue to contribute towards making a better life for all Edmontonians, both today and for future generations. Thank you for your attention, and we welcome your questions and discussion following hearing from our speakers.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation, for all the speakers. This is a great photo of how long we've endured trees being given out, and those look a little bigger than the ones my kids received. At this point, just talking about the process, administration has made their presentation, and it'll be now the opportunity for members of the public to provide their comments. Each of you will have 5 minutes to make your comments. The clerk will run the official time. However, those attending, participating virtually may wish to use a timer at home too. When the speaker is finished, please stay on the line, as committee may wish to ask questions at the end of the panel speakers. After comments from the public, committee will ask questions of the administration. For those participating virtually, please refrain from using the chat function in Google Meets during the meeting, as it creates issues of decorum, provides unfair advantage, and interferes with the live stream. Additionally, please remember to mute your microphone when you are not presenting or answering questions. If you experience any difficulties, the Office of the City Clerk has resources available to help you. Please reach out using the contact information provided in your registration or city.clerk@edmonton.ca. If you wish to observe the proceedings but not speak, please leave the meeting and watch the meeting online at www.edmonton.ca/meetings. So at this point, we're going to begin hearing from our speakers. Again, you're all in one panel, so once everybody has spoken, we will ask you questions. So please stay on the line. But our first speaker will be Ian Phillips. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I appreciate the opportunity, and esteemed members of council, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. As you know, I'm our Government Relations Director for Shaw Communications. Thank you for the timer. And Shaw has been operating in Edmonton since 1972. Our industry and Shaw's contributions have ranked Edmonton #2 in North America, according to Ookla, from a speed test perspective. We offer our services to many businesses and residents in Edmonton, and we absolutely respect and understand the importance and value of Edmonton's urban forest. Our objection to this proposed bylaw is focused on costs and timing. We've taken great efforts to work with the City of Edmonton, particularly over the last 18 months, to condense our permit approvals process. We've made great strides. We're down about 40% compared to 2 years ago in order to get our infrastructure into the homes and businesses in Edmonton. We are concerned that this proposed process will delay our ability to install and maintain our infrastructure. Shaw does not currently contravene any of the existing tree measures in the parkland bylaw or the traffic bylaw. We've never been approached or had obstacles with tree infrastructure and us damaging tree infrastructure, particularly from the City of Edmonton. The nature of Shaw's infrastructure in Edmonton has low to zero impact on trees. We attach our fiber lines and our coax cable lines to other parties, other utilities, aerial infrastructure, or we bury it in the ground as a shallow utility. The nature of our infrastructure is that it does not affect the tree health and well-being in Edmonton or in any of our markets. We request that there be a telecommunications exemption for the Edmonton tree bylaw. Like I said, we completely understand and value the trees, the urban forest in Edmonton, and our current operations reflect that value. We are enthused by some of the things that the city has done to look at this. We understand that this tree permitting process will occur in parallel with other permitting processes, which is encouraging, but the process still remains unclear. And we're also enthused that there is the provisions being made to allow for emergency access to fix broken infrastructure. Edmontonians rely on our infrastructure for their safety and well-being, and we will need to access that going forward. The other thing that I think the city should be aware of is just the sheer amount of volume of permits that would occur as a result of this bylaw. We've done an internal review, and we estimate that we would need 1,000 permits annually in order to be compliant with the bylaw the way we've interpreted it. As I said, our two primary concerns are timing to build our infrastructure, to maintain our infrastructure, and overall cost to the city and overall cost to operating in the city. I mean, as you know, Edmonton is a world-class city, and we provide world-class service in Edmonton. So I just say in conclusion, we request that our industry and utilities generally be exempted from this infrastructure, be exempted from this bylaw. Our infrastructure has low to no impact on Edmonton's urban forest, and we just hope that the committee and council more broadly would recognize that. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Phillips. And now we'll go to Bonnie Fermaniuk. Please go ahead.
Hi, good morning, committee members and city administration. Thank you for allowing me to speak this morning. Over the past 25 plus years, I've been dedicated to the city of Edmonton's urban forest. I am now retired, but have a passion to see that the city continues to grow and protect its urban forest in the parks, streets, and natural areas. I am the current president of the International Society of Arboriculture Prairie Chapter. One of our main goals is education and care of trees. There is an increasing number of studies showing the benefit of mature trees and the impacts of adjacent construction on tree health. I did have a presentation, but I was late getting it in. I had a picture of a young tree adjacent to a mature tree. This is where the city needs to take action on preventing damages because it takes years and years to replace the benefits and the impact of losing a mature tree. Currently, the city is encouraging increasing density, building in and up, but this is happening at the expense of our mature trees and mature neighborhoods. Yes, the city can collect damages, but once a tree starts to decline, it is hard to reverse the process. We have examples of really good home builders with lots of protection. And right adjacent to that, we'll see trees that are in extreme decline because the neighbors did not protect and the root systems have been suffocated. Was the root systems compacted, removed? We're never sure because the symptoms don't show up for 10 to 15 years because the mature tree has stored resources that will keep it not thriving, but surviving. Utility upgrades and new installation need to respect city assets. Yes, some are great and take great care. The city needs to maintain a tree corridor in the right of way so that replanting can continue if trees have to be removed. Without a bylaw, there seems to be no ability to enforce the tree protection that the companies have agreed to within their protection or preservation plans. Most damage is below ground, so you can't see the effects immediately. The trees are stressed, they're more susceptible to diseases. The province is currently Dutch elm disease free, but Dutch elm disease and emerald ash borer is on our doorstep. Mature trees versus replanting. Mature trees are removed, the city loses many benefits, and it takes 20, 30, 50 years to replace. It is a mature tree that gives the best return to our environment and saves the city money. Home builders, developers, building in mature neighborhoods and tree canopies because it is where people want to live. The quality of life increases with more outdoor living, cooler streets and homes, and improved mental health. It creates construction that will lead to tree death in the future, long after the builders leave. The city has been a great leader in urban forestry with the approval of the corporate tree management policy in 1989 and the introduction of new construction methods to reduce the impact of constructions on root systems. But the city is behind other municipalities in terms of not having a public tree bylaw. It is not enough to collect for damages. The city needs to prevent damages from happening in the first place. I've spent many years being part of a team to build and care for the urban forest, and I hope you will approve this bylaw to protect the canopy for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. We appreciate those. And our next speaker is Jill Robertson. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and city staff. My name is Jill Robertson. I am a partner at Dialogue in Edmonton, a landscape architect and a certified arborist. I'm here today to speak in support of the proposed bylaw for the preservation and protection of Edmonton's urban forest. As a landscape architect, I am privileged to say over my design colleagues that my work gets better over time. Unlike buildings or other infrastructure that immediately show wear and tear when they go into use, trees grow and evolve, contributing countless benefits to the public. Beyond the obvious benefits such as beauty and oxygen, climate resiliency, more and more research demonstrates the importance of trees for mental and physical health and overall community well-being. And I think we've seen Edmontonians flock to the river valley and enjoy the urban forest during these challenging times of COVID-19. Everybody loves trees. That is until they are in the way of construction, of density, of progress, and of development. Then trees become a nuisance and are all too frequently the lowest common denominator and quite literally the very first thing cut from a project. While there exist many technical solutions and creative ways to address design and construction around existing mature trees, these are often all too soon abandoned for an easier solution that involves an axe and a chainsaw. The status quo, unfortunately, in Edmonton is that trees are easy and cheap to replace. The reality is not true, as the loss of mature trees means the loss of genetic diversity, changes in soil condition that will impact the success and establishment of new trees, and the fact that it will take a lifetime to replace. In my role as a consultant in Edmonton, I am fortunate enough to work on some of our most important public spaces, and I advocate often to the point of obnoxiousness, as many of my contractors will say, on the importance of trees. In many cases, with a good contractor and when the stars align, the trees are preserved. However, all too often trees are cut down and there's nothing we can do to replace them. And the compensation that is paid for tree damage is insufficient to the ultimate overall well-being of Edmonton's urban forest. This tree bylaw has the potential to increase public awareness of the value that our trees hold and encourage the public, contractors, consultants, and other people active in work in Edmonton to abide by the rules for their preservation and their protection. I'll leave you with a quote from my favorite Dr. Seuss book, one that inspired me on my own professional journey. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. That's from the Lorax. Thank you so much for your time today.
And thank you very much, and appreciate those comments. And the next speaker will be Dustin Beiger. I don't know if I pronounced that right. I'm sorry.
You're pretty close, Beiger. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present. I am speaking out this morning in favor of the proposed bylaw. A little bit of context on my background. So I am presently researching and cataloging heritage trees in and around the city of Edmonton. And so typically those are trees that are unique, large, or have some kind of story behind them. And I think that there's been a lot of really great information in the reports and already from the other speakers about the important environmental benefits of trees, how it benefits our mental health. It's an important piece of green infrastructure. And the thing that I want to talk about briefly is that our urban forest is actually also a cultural artifact. So we have consciously built up this urban forest over time. These, 300,000 plus trees were planted by Edmontonians in the past, and they're continuing to be planted today. And so I think part of this discussion is really about how we treat this this legacy that we have built and continue to build. We're very fortunate in 2021 to have inherited all of these really great decisions by past planners, past citizens. And I think there's a little bit of responsibility to continue to build and kind of honor that cultural artifact and ensure that it is there for future generations. There's a bit of an asymmetry in sort of development when it comes to trees. So you have, it takes 100 years, obviously, to grow a 100-year-old tree. But one bad decision can harm it, and be the end of that tree, and then we have to start all over again. And so I think that something like this bylaw is really a simple, forward-thinking, preventative way of ensuring that we do honor that cultural legacy and ensure that we have this healthy, mature, growing urban forest, this important green infrastructure, as we know, to help mitigate many of the challenges that we're facing due to climate change, and ensure that we have that going forward for hundreds of years in the future. And I think on that note, I'll probably end there. It's pretty brief. I know. I'm happy to answer some more questions about heritage trees if we get back around to it. But I'm going to let the next speaker jump in.
Thank you very much for your comments, and we will then go to the next speaker, Mick Graham from IDEA. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee and administration. IDEA is very much in favor of the proposed bylaw with a proviso. So we, like everyone else, are very much attached to our mature urban trees. They are one of the reasons most of our members choose to build in mature neighborhoods. They see the beauty of the tree canopy as an asset to the projects that we're building. However, so we're in favor of tree protection. We're mostly compliant. I think all our members are compliant. We put on a suite of courses. One of them is best practices in infill construction. And part of that course is a presentation by forestry about how best to protect the trees and an explanation of the regulations and guidelines that they've provided, which I think are very comprehensive. And I think the science behind it is sound. The other piece that we're in favor of is finding people who don't comply. I mean, the resources are there to know how to do it right. The members of forestry that you talk to are always helpful. So, yeah, I don't think there's any excuse for not following the guidelines that they provide. What makes me cringe is the prospect of another permit fee and another permit process. If we've had 196 bad actors out of almost 9,000 building permits, it seems like we're good 98% of the time. So, I'm wondering if perhaps this is a solution looking for a problem. The present process, this present process seems to be pretty good, and IDEA will happily partner with the city and with forestry in spreading the word and trying to get more compliance. And again, we're also happy to point out to forestry or bylaw any perceived problem projects in the areas where we're building. So I'm a little concerned that we're looking at trying to fund a process for 9,000 permits. They've been working on this for 4 years. They still don't really know how much it's going to cost. we've got a wild spread of potential permit fees. It's shaping up like a money pit and another lengthy red tape process that's only going to discourage infill, which seems to be the opposite track to what this council is trying to achieve. It already costs $400 or $500 per tree to provide the protection to the tree and the boulevard. Probably more than that now with the cost of lumber where it is. And it's an expense that I'm happy to bear because I think it's important. But if now I've got to take out a permit and wait for that process to evolve, already it's cumbersome. We end up with 2 OSCAM permits as well as our tree protection permit. I don't know how much more cumbersome it's going to be if we add another bunch of administration to get it done. So that's our anxiety. We're in favor of protection. We're in favor of enforcement, but more red tape we can't support. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. We'll now go to Jeff Bertram from EPCOR. Please go ahead.
Good morning, members of council. My name is Jeff Bertram. I'm the Senior Manager of Government Relations for EPCOR Utilities, and I'm here with my colleague Guillaume Bachand, who's our Director of Project Management in EPCOR Drainage. And together, we're representing our lines of business, which include EPCOR Distribution and Transmission, EPCOR Water Canada, EPCOR Drainage, and EPCOR Technologies, and collectively I will refer to us as EPCOR. And EPCOR is here today to express our support for the development of a public tree bylaw. However, this bylaw must contain the necessary exemptions to protect utility service providers and utility customers against the potentially negative impacts this bylaw is likely to create. Utility service providers remain unclear as to what purpose the bylaw will serve or what problem or issue it's trying to remedy, as we have not seen any data, research, or detailed information that correlates utility company activity with tree damage, destruction, or tree deaths. Utility companies, including EPCOR, have no history of willful disregard for trees. In fact, we pride ourselves for ensuring we take great care not to damage or remove trees unless it is absolutely necessary to make the workspace safe. The proposed tree bylaw appears to be a one-size-fits-all approach that may work or be necessary for property developers or builders. However, the impact to utility service providers and our ability to provide service for our customers will be greatly impacted. EPCOR's utility infrastructure serves approximately 700 square kilometers in the city of Edmonton. Our utilities include more than 17,000 kilometers of linear infrastructure, both above and below the ground. And most of that infrastructure is within close proximity to trees. EPCOR has over 50,000 poles, 21,000 hydrants, 23,000 underground transformers, and over 62,000 catch basins. Again, most of this infrastructure is within close proximity to trees. We've estimated that EPCOR alone would require 8,000 permits per year from the city to perform our work. Contractors who perform work on behalf of EPCOR will also be required to obtain the necessary permits they need to do their work. The expense of creating a new permitting process at this scale would be borne by Edmontonians, whether as utility customers or taxpayers, and really have no public benefit. In addition to the expense to citizens from this process, we're greatly concerned about the potential for delays to planned and emergency work, an increase in staffing required by the city and each utility company to administer this permitting process. Our utility infrastructure operates under various conditions, including extreme temperatures, pressures, weather conditions, and is greatly impacted by human interaction. This infrastructure requires constant attention either through emergency service work, such as a tree branch falling across a power line, as we experienced in last week's spring snowfall, or a water main break repair, through maintenance work such as root grinding and drainage line and tree trimming and electricity right-of-way, and for project activity like utility moves for LRT right-of-ways and neighborhood renewals. Utility companies are regulated service providers who operate under various agreements, such as franchise agreements, municipal access arrangements, approval to operate, right-of-way agreements, and performance-based regulation, to name a few. These agreements may include rate setting and reliability targets for utility services after an interruption, such as a water main break, power outage, or sewage blockage. Customers quite reasonably expect restoration of the utility services as soon as possible when they're impacted, as do our regulators, which includes the City of Edmonton. This bylaw as drafted in attachment 5 does not demonstrate a full understanding of the emergency and maintenance work are priorities for utilities and for customers, and for paying for a tree permit after restoration work is performed does not add any value. While the city has discussed the potential for a blanket agreement, this discussion has not been specific enough for us to be confident about our ability to deliver reliable, timely, and cost-effective utility service under the new framework. An exemption for utilities, or a more efficient approach that does not administratively burden our necessary utility work, should be considered to achieve administration's objectives. The city already has a utility line assignment permit as a standard condition for all utility installations to protect their assets from utility interactions. Furthermore, the OSCAM permit must be obtained by utilities for work we perform on city road right-of-ways, including roads, sidewalks, and boulevards. The addition of a public tree bylaw only adds an additional layer of process, time, and expense, and needless red tape at a time when governments are actually trying to reduce red tape regulations. In closing, we love Edmonton's beautiful urban forest and ensuring it remains healthy and vibrant. Our innovative and recently recognized SERP initiative will add trees in areas where it can help reduce the quantity of stormwater getting into sewers. However, we are concerned that the proposed bylaw will create delays, increase costs, and risk for EPCOR and our customers. We respectfully request that Urban Planning Committee consider that the draft bylaw be amended to include an exemption for EPCOR's utilities and does not impact any other agreements we have with the city. We also recommend a similar exemption be extended to natural gas and telecommunication utilities providers as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Right at the wire. And now I understand, Mr. Vachon, you're just for questions only. So we will then go, that's correct, Mr. Vachon?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Then I'm going to go to Jacqueline Hodgson from ATCO. Please go ahead. We can't hear you, Ms. Hodgson.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we are. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So good morning and thank you, Madam Chair, esteemed councillors, committee members, and guests. My name is Jacqueline Hodgson and I am the Vice President of Engineering for the Natural Gas Division of ATCO, and I'm here today with my colleague Rebecca White, Manager of Distribution Engineering, who'll be available if there are any questions. I'll try to be brief as many of our concerns are similar to others that have already been voiced. While ATCO is in favor of tree protection, similar to others that have spoken, application of the proposed bylaw to shallow utilities that are already protecting trees through internal procedures adds unnecessary cost, burden, and creates an impedance to our ability to provide safe, reliable, cost-effective, and timely natural gas service to nearly 300,000 homes and businesses in the city of Edmonton. ATCO is committed to protecting people, property, and the environment, including trees. And throughout the course of our work, my apologies, I jumped ahead in my notes here. As probably foreshadowed, ATCO is opposed to the proposed bylaw unless concerns regarding our ability to continue to provide service in a safe, reliable, timely, and cost-effective manner in compliance with the bylaw can be addressed, or as stated by others, that utilities are exempt. ATCO has procedures in place, design pipelines, and other facilities to minimize interference with city trees. Like others, to our knowledge, we have not played a role in damaging city trees, and to date, we haven't seen any data or information to suggest that utilities are a barrier to protecting trees and their longevity and health. ATCO believes that site-specific tree protection permits are burdensome, unnecessary, and redundant due to existing mechanisms in place to protect trees and city infrastructure. It is unclear what benefit ratepayers and the citizens of Edmonton will receive from the introduction of the proposed bylaw for utility companies. Just as a recap, we're concerned with the cost and the schedule impact to both planned and unplanned emergency work that the new bylaw would impose. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. The next speaker will be Don Tolsma from the Canadian Home Builders Association. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to the members of the Urban Planning Committee. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name is Don Tolsma. I'm the president of Timber House Developments. I'm here today on behalf of the Canadian Home Builders Association, Edmonton Region, where I serve on the board of directors. The residential construction industry in Edmonton is a network of local businesses that represents more than 26,000 jobs, 1.9 billion in annual wages, and 3 billion in annual investment. I wish to begin by thanking you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the association today on item 6.1, the proposed bylaw for tree preservation and protection. As we prepare to welcome 1 million more people to Edmonton, as outlined in the city plan, our members have the ability and expertise to provide housing that meets the needs of current and future residents. However, if we want to reach the intensification targets, we must see a regulatory environment that supports builders as they invest in Edmonton. We recognize the environmental, ecological, economic, and social benefits of Edmonton's urban forest and understand that trees are valuable assets that should be preserved and protected during construction. We understand that the city requires a mechanism to protect trees, and we're not opposed to the development of a tree protection bylaw to hold bad actors accountable when trees are damaged. However, the CHBA Edmonton Region does not support a tree protection permit that will create an additional red tape and an added cost for good builders who are taking the right steps to prevent damage to trees. Our members already follow the city's existing processes required to protect trees, including preparing a tree protection or preservation plan, ensuring the tree protection is on site in advance of construction, and planning for tree protection related costs. By creating a permit with an associated fee, the city is effectively taxing builders who already follow the existing tree protection processes. The fees that were presented to the industry stakeholders during engagement were based on cost recovery for the city of Edmonton, which is not a suitable approach. According to the report presented by administration, between January of 2019 and April 2021, 196 work sites were left in poor condition with different levels of damage to city trees. These work sites were not limited to residential construction only. For context, in the same time frame, as Mick mentioned, 9,575 building permits were approved by the city for residential construction. This data serves to demonstrate that incidents of damage to city trees reflects a very small proportion of construction activities and is likely the result of the minority of builders who choose not to follow the city's existing processes for tree protection. The proposed tree bylaw is intended to curb the activities of a small number of builders. However, if it is approved with permit fees, it will add significant cost to all development, which will ultimately be passed on to the home buyer. If the city wishes to truly preserve its urban forest, there must be a greater emphasis on education targeted at builders who neglect to protect trees and stricter enforcement against those who cause the damage. The city needs to explore options that can be used to hold builders accountable for obtaining proper tree protection without applying fees to the industry as a whole. We support the intent of the tree protection bylaw and are eager to work with the city to develop a tree protection permit process that incentivizes rather than penalizes builders who protect city trees. We respectfully request that administration conduct further work on the tree protection bylaw, specifically the tree permit process, in collaboration with the Canadian Home Builders Association, Edmonton Region, and other industry stakeholders before returning with recommendations. We also urge the Urban Planning Committee to consider budgetary options to support the administration of the tree protection bylaw without the use of permit fees. Thank you for letting me speak, and I'll be happy to answer any questions when we are done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tulsma. We will now go to Christine Kowalczyk from the Edmonton River Valley Conservation Coalition. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you. Good morning, Mayor and councillors. The Edmonton River Valley Conservation Coalition would like to state our support for the proposed bylaw for tree protection and preservation. As the city's urban forestry management plan states, Edmonton's trees represent an irreplaceable asset. And I quote, unlike other municipal infrastructure, trees increase in value over time. The urban forest makes a quantifiable contribution to the long-term livability of our city. Trees provide valuable ecosystem services in terms of mitigating climate change, cleaning the air, cooling the city, helping to prevent both drought and flooding, and providing food and habitat for wildlife. They also contribute greatly to our mental and spiritual health and happiness, and are central to the beauty of our city. And at even the most basic financial level, homes near natural parks with mature forests benefit from increased real estate values. Trees are so valuable in our city, the city plan states the city's commitment to plant 2 million new trees. Likewise, the city's 2021-22 Urban Forest Management Plan has stated its goal of increasing the city's canopy cover from 13.3% to 20%. However, tree planting alone will never help us effectively mitigate climate change or achieve our canopy cover goals. What is even more important and most cost efficient is to protect the mature trees we already have. As William Moomaw, lead author on 5 reports for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has shown, mature trees provide exponentially greater ecosystem benefits, including sequestering more carbon than young trees. He thus promotes proforestation, or the protection of mature trees, over the planting of new ones. UBC researcher Suzanne Simard's groundbreaking work has also shown that mature trees are necessary for healthy forests and healthy ecosystems. In Edmonton, as mature trees make up only 15% of the city's urban forest, it is critical that every one of those trees be protected and preserved. Over the past few years, however, many of our city's mature trees have been destroyed. One of the reasons for this loss is the harm caused by construction that damages the roots through excavation or compaction. As administration's report states, between January 2019 and April 2021 alone, the city found 196 work sites that were left in poor condition with different levels of damage to city trees. On my own street in Riverdale, 2 70-year-old ash boulevard trees, which had provided so much shade and other benefits for our street, died in front of an infill construction site and were cut down this spring. The story is the same across the city. It's no surprise, therefore, that administration found in its public surveys that Edmontonians showed strong support for having a public tree bylaw and were interested to see more accountability for damages or loss of trees. The RBCC is with the public in supporting the proposed bylaw, including the permit process outlined by administration. We furthermore support a future similar bylaw to protect and preserve trees on private property, which already exists in many cities across Canada, including Toronto, Ottawa, Vancouver, and Surrey. In all cases, we also support public education on the value of trees, encouragement for new construction to happen around trees, and for the City of Edmonton to lead by example. As the planners outline in their report today, funding for public education and enforcement can come directly from permit fees. As the City of Edmonton has declared itself a biophilic city, protecting and preserving our city's trees only makes sense for that declaration to be meaningful. Protecting and preserving trees is indeed one of the most critical issues of our time, and we thank Council for requesting this initiative and the planners for undertaking such thorough work. We will look forward to seeing this important bylaw passed. Thank you for considering the ERBCC's position on this issue.
Thank you very much for your comments. We will now go to Haroon Alley.
Yes, thank you so much for letting me speak, Madam Chair. And I really appreciate everyone that's come out this morning to speak about this really important bylaw. To put it simple, trees are really important to Edmonton's future. This bylaw will help protect close to 400,000 trees across the city of Edmonton. As someone that's, well, let's be honest, as someone that's really young, I think it's so incredibly important for us to preserve trees. And it's because it's one of the most important things for Edmonton's urban forest. The city plan clearly lays out the need for preservation of trees. Trees bring 5 really big major values: like community, social value, environmental value, and personal and spiritual value. Our streets, parks, playgrounds, and backyards are lined with trees that create a peaceful, aesthetically pleasing environment. Trees increase our quality of life by bringing natural elements and wildlife habitats into urban settings. The environmental value in protecting our environment is obvious. As a young person, I think it's incredibly important for our environment to be preserved for my generation and for future generations. Edmonton has inherited a lot of good decisions and ideas from past councils, and this is just us really paying it forward. I'm really proud to support this bylaw, but I'm also, well, I've been listening to other speakers, and something I'm hearing and a big factor is that I'm seeing a lot of I'm seeing this idea that this bylaw goes against Infill, and I don't really think that. I think this bylaw supports Infill because in reality, what we're trying to do here is that we're trying to protect our environment for future generations, but at the same time, though, we're also trying to let home builders build homes. But this bylaw really it's not purposely trying to create an extra layer of red tape. It's trying to protect trees. So I'm kind of concerned about that narrative, but I think this bylaw, it just does so much good for the community. The permit process, yes, it takes long, and that's unfortunate. That's something that the city of Edmonton should definitely look into speeding up and how they can do a better job there. But I don't think that inherently nullifies the bylaw. This is a good bylaw, and it shows a good support for trees, and ensures that we're really supporting our environment. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alley. I will now go to Charles Richmond from the Sierra Club. Please go ahead.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, councillors. Charlie Richmond speaking for Sierra Club on the proposed bylaw for tree preservation and protection, which is an appropriate title for a bylaw, which as fabled rock lickers and tree huggers, we could only support. But there's some minor issues in the text which give us pause and deserve amendment. To be clear, this is not a criticism of urban forestry operations, whom we have found respectful in citizen interactions, and they maintain an exemplary client service model, in our opinion. But operations has to operate under bylaw and policy, and to the extent that their idealized mandate does not contemplate certain situations relating, it complicates their life. Briefly, then, our recommendations around 4 matters. 1, application of a largely standardized operational procedures appropriate to street and manicured park trees is not necessarily adequate to capture the infinite complex reality of natural ecosystems. Most of our city trees, by the numbers, perhaps by 3 orders of magnitude, are found in Edmonton's natural stands. And given their definition in bylaw, natural, in quotes, are best left that way, not subject to normal operational forestry or arborist procedures, except as a matter of human safety, without appropriate assessment. Yes, trees are the most noticeable features for natural area visitors, but they are not a proxy for an ecosystem. They exist in an ecological context. While the draft calls for a sign-off on operations by an ISA-certified arborist, who can be a tech, landscape architect, or other discipline approved by the city, in quotes, the bylaw and operation should explicitly include the category of professional biologists. And the city has a few of these folks still kicking around. Relegating professional biologists with requisite 4-year university or graduate degrees to other disciplines approved by the city, unquote, reflects a forestry-centric view of conservation of natural areas, which we suggest may compromise this valued asset. 2, while the proposed bylaw addresses residents and developers, it's not clear it should also bind the city. Urban forestry operations must be made aware of these regulations and their obligations under them. We recommend city administration should be added to sections constraining residents and developers unless explicitly exempted. If there's time, I'll be happy to relate some tragic stories about past forestry operations resulting in compromise to our city's natural ecosystems. Perhaps for questions. 3, given the inherent standing risk to city trees by human indiscretion in general, there should be an advertised emergency number for citizen intervention to a responsible manager. 311 will not do. The tree would be felled before a contact, let alone an operational decision, could be made. We don't call 311 for human emergencies. 4, attachment 6, the pre-launch implementation, which is not properly part of the bylaw, but the implementation. The service design review generated opportunities across several categories. We note in particular, number 2, develop ways to enable nonprofit organizations to further the reach of the program, listed as a long-term goal. And number 10, develop material for the public's role in monitoring compliance with tree protection as a medium-term goal. Both of these operations would hugely further the protection of city trees with a minimal investment. Time investment, certainly, from the experience of other municipalities who rely on citizen eyes on the ground, and the free expertise found in university cities, a definite payback. There are many NGOs devoted to the goals of natural area stewardship. They should be included upfront as part of operations. Sierra Club has fielded calls from the development community asking if we might offer an independent opinion and possibly support a plan questioned by the city. If the developers can do it, surely the city administration might be similarly able. Thank you so much. I'm done.
Thank you very much for your comments. And we'll go to our last speaker, Mariah Samji. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Mayor, and Council. Thank you so much for hearing from us today. As noted in our letter to you, IDEA has been engaging with administration on this bylaw since 2017 through education sessions, engagement sessions, interviews, and we've had forestry come out to every iteration of our building education program that Mick had talked about previously. All that to say is that we're rooting for trees. As stated by Mick, IDEA is in full support of having a tree bylaw to help create consistency in our protection practices and address those who are not in compliance through education and fines. The bylaw will also help to create more educational resources for industry, utilities, and homeowners. Today's current practices for builders are anyone who is applying for a building permit must provide a tree protection plan outlining how they will specifically protect our trees. They also have to apply for an OSCAM permit if they need to cross a boulevard within 5 meters of any public tree. That is to say, most infill projects have an OSCAM permit. We also want to note that between fencing, mats, and tree protection plans, people are spending approximately $500 to $1,000 right now to protect trees. I want to take a minute to note that at least 98% of Edmonton's building community is doing it right. The report does not outline who, where, or where the damages are being occurred, and we believe that data is necessary to help create a successful bylaw and educational materials. We are hoping today that Council will direct administration to come back with a bylaw that does not link to extra costs or additional permits. The draft permit fees would cost the infill community anywhere between $300 and $500 for the permit, and we would need to provide a preservation plan, which would cost an additional $2,000 for a certified arborist to review it. This is adding significant cost to 100% of our building entrepreneurs instead of focusing our city's limited resources to the 2%. The city has been hit hard in these financial times, and administration acknowledges in the report that they don't know how much it will cost for them to resource or enforce the permit process. We see this as very problematic, as other Canadian cities have told administration that resourcing the process and enforcement is the biggest challenge for them. We would like to see resources go to address those who aren't in compliance instead. We thank administration for their efforts on this bylaw. However, we do believe that starting with a bylaw and empowering change through education will lead to the outcomes they are looking for, instead of adding significant costs and timelines. Let's work together to build beautiful, people-centered communities that people can afford and where trees can flourish. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments, and we want to thank everyone for taking the time today to provide your comments to committee. And so now we're going to have councillors, first with the committee and then others, ask questions of any of the panelists. So we'll start with Councillor Henderson. Please go ahead.
Yeah, a whole bunch of questions. I'm not quite sure where to start. Maybe I'll start with Mr. Graham and Mr. Tolsma and Ms. Samji, because I just wanted to double check the numbers. The reality, I mean, this would only apply, I think, to anybody who is working near a tree. I'm assuming that 9,000 number includes greenfield where no trees have yet been planted. So just to put that in perspective, we're not talking about 9,000 infill, are we? No. Right. So I'm just struggling as Mr. Graham. I'm seeing you shake your head. So I'm guessing that was the answer. That's what I'm responding to. So in actual fact, probably the percentages of places where this would apply, my reading of the bylaw is it only applies if you're actually working close to a tree within 5 meters. So I'm guessing those 9,000, most of them are nowhere near a tree. Is that a fair assumption, Mr. Tolsma? Probably you're working mostly in the greenfield situation.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. 100% of I would say 90% of my business is all infill.
Okay. But that 9,000 number includes an awful lot of greenfield, correct?
I would reason to believe that's correct, yes.
And I'm guessing in a greenfield situation, the permits wouldn't be necessary because the trees haven't been planted yet.
Yeah, from what my recollection from the engagement was that greenfield was somewhat exempt from this due to the FAC not being completed yet. But that being said, sorry, Graham, or Mick, just on the infill stuff, I would say 99% of the projects that are infill related do have one form of tree in front or another.
I would agree on the infill situation. But I don't think that 9,000 number is just infill, correct?
So, Councillor Henderson, I do want to note that we weren't given breakdown of data, and I think that that is really problematic at this stage.
Fair enough.
We can't comment fully on that.
Understood, but okay. So, and my other question is, and this has been a long-standing issue, because I know IDEA is doing really good work. We've had this conversation with home builders, but in the past, not all people building, I would think, particularly in the infill situation, are your members, correct? There's a lot of people that are not members of IDEA. There are a lot of builders that are not home builders. And that's always been our challenge. That I know you guys are doing good work. That's not really the issue, but you're not in a position to enforce or educate those non-members, correct?
Well, that's correct, Councillor, and that's the problem we have with the bylaw that's been presented. It seems like the people who are complying are the ones who are getting penalized, and it seems like a misuse of resources. And we're here to help in any way we can.
I mean, this is not just about trees. We have this conversation around excavation. It's all sorts of different things, and our problem is how to be proactive rather than reactive, and I think that's what we're struggling with. So, but you're doing great work with your members. Anybody who chooses to be a member, but the real issue is how to police the non-members, who are probably mostly the ones that are non-members in part because they choose not to pay attention to the rules.
So, Councillor Henderson, an infill house gets inspected about a dozen times by various departments, and the requirements for the tree protection are not all that complex. There's a drawing that we submit that compares the size of the fence around the tree to the diameter of the trunk. It would seem to me that it wouldn't be difficult to show one of the inspectors who comes through, how big that fence needs to be, there needs to be some kind of boulevard protection, and so we don't really need to add a huge layer of red tape here.
Yeah, and I'll ask questions about that, because I think, I don't think we want to be adding red tape. I think we're trying to come up with something that can get there before the damage is done and not after, and that's been the frustration. Anyway, I have a few questions as well. Maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Bertram. I'm curious, because understanding that in a whole bunch of situations, there's probably not an issue here, and we hold ourselves to a certain standard with our public bylaw that that if we have to make the choice to do damage to a tree, the city holds itself accountable for that now. So at least there's a disincentive when we're doing it. And I'm just wondering what the process is for the EPCOR, for ATCO, in those circumstances where you have to do something to a tree. Are you, one, compensating us for that? And two, are you applying for that process to do it? Because I recognize there's a whole bunch of situations where probably there isn't anything, but you yourself said there were times when you may have to do something to a tree. And I think some kind of mechanism to be able to create disincentive about that, or the city to give permission for its tree to be damaged, is probably important. And I'm just wondering what the current process is.
Councillor, I'm going to ask Guillaume to take that question, as he's our Director of Project Management on the drainage side, and he would see this on a fairly regular basis.
For sure. So typically we would first follow the ULA process. So we'll be transparent with the city to share what we're actually going to do. Like, we provide drawings and explain, and if there's impact to a tree, usually we'll have a discussion with the forestry team to figure out what the approach should be. We will protect tree. We'll follow the corporate policy from, and I'm trying to remember the city corporate tree management policy, I think C456. So we make sure that also this is part of our contract with our contractors, and we'll figure out what is the appropriate way to deal with a situation where a tree needs to be removed, if that's the case, while trying to do everything we can. Like, for us, it's really important to take care of trees. So we do anything we can to avoid, but once we can't, we'll figure out a mitigation strategy to provide safe, reliable service to the people.
Great, thanks. I'm out of time. I'll have to come around again. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now go to Councillor Beiger for questions.
Thank you. Question for Mr. Phillips from Shaw. What is your main concern with this proposed, inching towards this bylaw? Like, I know you said it'll add extra red tape and delays. Do you have to, when you are, let's say, laying cables and for your, I guess, for your services, are you required? Is your understanding is that you are required to draw a permit for each property different at one at a time?
Thanks, Councillor Beiger. Typically, we will get all of our necessary permitting for the line, whether it be a fiber line or a coax line. In general, at one stage. It varies in distance, obviously, depending on the project. And to answer your first question as well, is our biggest concern is time to market. So our concern is this will cause even more delays to being able to bring our products, to businesses and residents in Edmonton.
Okay, so the way I guess I read the report, it is basically saying that it has to be some kind of online process there, not a lengthy process. What are your feelings on that?
Well, I mean, the application process will be online. I mean, we are assuming it will reflect, the other permits that we need to get from the City of Edmonton from a process perspective. But I mean, there's also reference to having an arborist have to do a site inspection at, these, estimated to be 1,000 permits we will apply for annually. So our fear is that this will take a considerable amount of time, and that the resources just won't be there, particularly at the onset.
Okay, and Mr. Richmond, question for you is all these companies that provide services, they're required to draw permits. They're going to be they're not going to put the money from their pocket. It's also going to come from all the consumers. You think we have a big enough problem in this city as far as damage to trees is concerned to go to this measure?
Do you read me? Am I on?
You definitely on.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry, I'm coming in by phone. Actually, we chose not to speak to the topic that's been mainly discussed so far, and we were simply adding some other considerations. So I think it would be best if I didn't. If I gave you an opinion, it would not be an organizational opinion; it would be a personal opinion. So I'd rather not speak to that, if that's all right.
Okay, and then I guess I'll go on to ask Mr. Dalsma. In your mind, Mr. Dalsma, is there a big enough problem for the city to come up with something like this?
In my opinion, no. I think even the current process that's in place is cumbersome, and we're going through a rigorous process already just to make sure we protect the trees. And I would like to see some more data and analytics to prove where this damage is coming from. To me, this is a very minor thing. I love trees. I think the builders that are part of IDEA, part of the Canadian Home Builders Association, we do our due diligence, and I think we're paying the penalty here for with a proposed fee. We're paying the penalty for the bad actors. And I also just wanted to clarify one thing I said earlier. Greenfield is not 100% exempt from these. So again, like Mariah spoke, we're not 100% sure on which permits are including and excluding this process, but I'm in full support of the bylaw, Mr. Councillor, just not a permit fee. I love, Edmonton's biophilic. My business is naturally inspired living. That's my tagline for my business. Biophilia is part of our business plan. So to answer your question, no, I do not think that this problem is big enough to implement a fee. But I think a deeper dive into how we can protect these trees and educate people on how to do so, the ones that are destroying the trees, should be done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your time's up. I will go to committee members. Councillor Katarina.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and some good questions at this point. I guess in my mind, the last question that was asked of where the problem is or how big this problem is, given the number of permits and the uncertainty from so many in different industries of how this applies or doesn't apply to them. I would think that after all this time from 2017 till now, that a lot of those questions would have been answered by administration and included in this report. So just some clarification, the number of permits that I heard from Mr. Phillips was 1,000, that's Shaw. So I could assume that all other telecommunications companies, be it TELUS or anyone else, would have either the same or approximately the same that they'd be concerned with, even though they're not speaking here today. That would be a fair assumption, Mr. Phillips?
Yes, yeah, that's fair. I would estimate.
So just clarify something for me. Do you actually get permitting for a particular line, or do you get you have to get permitting for each individual address to connect to? How does the process work?
For each particular line. So if we're doing a utility line, we'll get one permit for the line itself. And then presumably, complete our construction process for the designated area that we've applied for.
Okay, so it's linear with that. So we can add a few more permits there from all the permits that have been gone, and say that not all of them would actually be implicated in this bylaw, but we have 9,000, and I know there's been some questions around that, and there's no information on how they've been split. We have from EPCOR over 8,000, and I assume ATCO as well. I didn't hear a number of permits that they would need to apply for. So from ATCO, Jacqueline Hudson, do you have any indication of what impact this would have on you?
So thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
So our estimation is somewhere between the 500 to 1,000 permits per year range. And I'll also defer for any other detailed questions on the process to Rebecca White, who's also on the call.
Okay, no, that I just wanted to get a sense of what you were number of permits that you would be looking at. And Mariah, 98% of your industry isn't compliant, and they do a great job. So you're talking about 2% of people or businesses that are maybe not complying 100%, or some are complying 0%, some might be complying 50%. Mariah, can you go a little bit deeper into that?
Of course. So we took the best data that we could get. That's where that 9,500 permit number comes from. So we pulled how many building permits were pulled during the time that administration had put into their report versus the 194, I believe, or 96 damages. And that's where we got the 98% from. However, we don't know if that 196 were infill related. We don't know where that all comes from, and I think
so. Yeah,
those are some big question marks.
Yeah, a lot of the details with the question marks. And would it be fair to say, Mariah, that since 2017, the start of this, that those sorts of things should have been provided, information on what we're actually talking about here? Because if I boil it down, 198 out of tens of thousands, I don't see a problem here.
I think we're aligned in our thinking.
Okay, we'll have some questions for administration. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Katarina, and I'll ask a couple of questions. So many of mine have been asked already. I'm going to start with Mr. Vachon. You were talking to Councillor Henderson about that you were supportive and you were protecting trees. So then tell me how this proposed bylaw may impact your business then, if you're already protecting trees.
Yeah, so as far as the activities we would do in the field, I think very minimally. I would expect that we already fulfill most of what will be expected. The difference will be that we would have to apply for a permit ahead of time and wait for that permit to be approved. That's the main impact. And because of the quantity of work we do, like as Jeff was saying, we've got a lot of interconnection. Like we've got customers and assets everywhere in the city, close to trees all the time. All our assets are close to tree. We take it. We care about trees already, but that would be where there would be an impact, and we'd be concerned with sometime a response time for customers. Like it could delay even customer services in cases or restoration or our ability to meet our need to deliver service safely and reliably.
So when I read it, it looked like emergent work would be excluded. Would that address some of your concerns if you could go and provide service in emergency situations? Or is it more than that?
Thanks for the question. It would help. I think it's more than that because we have lots of activities going on. We've got also project activities, but generally it would help. We just haven't seen any details. There's discussion about a blanket agreement or something like that without any specifics. So at this point, it's hard to say what that means. If there would be further clarification, and that's why we thought an exemption would probably be more appropriate as long as we follow corporate tree protection policies, which we fully intend to do, right? Like that's not the concern. The concern was the additional administrative efforts here that we are challenged to see the value. Perhaps even applying after the fact for a permit, we couldn't understand what that would benefit at this point.
Okay, so you're hoping either for an exemption or a blanket permit that would cover you for a season or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Mr. Phillips, is that what you're hoping to see as well? An exemption or a blanket permit?
Yes, Councillor Essinger. Ideally, we would see an exemption, recognizing that our infrastructure is low to no impact on the urban forest in Edmonton.
Okay, understanding that, but I heard one of the speakers that, it does take some time to see the damage to a tree. What would happen then if you did create damage? What would you do? You're in a situation and there is trees. Would you not then feel responsible?
Yes, I mean we would remit, and we are good corporate actors. We would fix any problems that may have been caused by us or contractors who are doing work on our behalf. I mean, a lot of it is foreseeable. Our infrastructure hangs on power poles that are owned and operated and maintained by by utility providers generally. So we don't interact directly with damaging trees, Councillor, and nor have we ever been flagged by the city, or in any of our operators in Alberta for damaging trees.
Okay, and then my final question is for Ms. Robertson. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
You spoke in support of the proposed bylaw based on some of your work that you've done. You've heard today about concern about what it might add to the timing or the work on sites. How do you react to that?
I'm disappointed to hear that those are the concerns, because I think that most of our construction requires permitting, and proactive project planning should mean that this isn't a delay to the construction. And I think that in the scheme of overall developments, the costs that are being assigned to tree permits are relatively small, compared to other development permitting costs and the profits that are made as a result of these developments.
So you believe it's reasonable?
I do believe it's reasonable, yes.
Okay, looks like I'm out of time, so we'll go now to Councillor Cartmel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Esslinger. So I do see the distinction between the various utilities, and I'll speak plainly, the infill contractors. And I'll perhaps pick on Mr. Graham to start with. And I understand, Mr. Graham, your comments to be that you feel that a fine process is more appropriate than a permit process. Is Mr. Graham there? I don't see his. Oh, there he is. Okay. Did I get that right?
That's correct, sir.
And so a lot of the conversation we're having is around the bad actors, is kind of the way that's been phrased. And I hear you say that it's costing the good actors $400 to $500 per tree to protect the tree.
That's correct.
Those bad actors might decide to forego that $400 or $500 and not protect the tree. So what would then be the right fine to make sure that doesn't happen? Yeah, because it's really hard to replace. Like, it's easy to replace a curb.
Yeah.
It's easy to replace a little bit of sod. It's really, really hard to replace a 60 or 80 or 40-year-old tree. So
right.
The damage, as has been said, the damage is done. So going back and fining a contractor that is not particularly diligent to start with by virtue of their actions, and expecting them then to pay a fine rather than just disappearing into the night like a lot of the bad actors might do, is that really a reasonable process? Even though it is a smaller number of people? The complaints I get, Mr. Graham, in my office are about that lot splitting or that infill, where it's not just the city trees, but someone comes in and demolishes a building and clear cuts the lots, and all the trees are gone. What do we do to prevent that?
Well, I don't think, respectfully, Councillor, that's within the purview of this discussion. I thought we were talking about the protection of city-owned trees. Is that not correct?
Well, we're talking about that today, yeah, but I think there's a question about, I think the reason we're talking about that protection is because of the actions of some of the people in the infill construction industry. And I think that does extend onto the private property that they're redeveloping. And that's a question I'm going to have here later in the meeting.
Well, if we're going to pursue that logic, then anybody who owns a house in Edmonton, do they need to get a permit to cut a tree down on their property? What if the tree's diseased? What if they're changing their landscaping and want to take a tree down? I think, I don't know where this can go, but what I do know is that I would like to focus our attention on those builders who are not protecting the trees on city land as they're obliged to do. So, identifying the bad actors is where I would like to see some emphasis placed in this bylaw, and whether it's a $1,000 fine or a $5,000 fine. I don't know that it's up to me to decide. I would suggest 1,000 as a starting point, but the reality is we haven't been given a whole lot of information by forestry. I mean, some of those photos that they provided is plainly curb and gutter and street repair work, right? So those are city contractors.
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't know what to do about that. They're always going to be working within 5 meters of a tree, and they're always going to be hacking through roofs.
I appreciate your comments, Mr. Graham. I have the same concerns. Where does it stop? What about that homeowner that won't remove the diseased tree that threatens the adjacent property? It does this, doesn't it? Right. So my question then for you is this. If we're talking about protection of city-owned trees and we're talking about actions of particular contractors, what would you think about some sort of a deposit system whereby, depending upon the caliper, the size, the age of the tree, that A contractor has to put down a deposit for the protection of those trees, which is returned at the completion of a project, should those trees be properly preserved. Would that be something your industry would be willing to explore?
Yes, sir. I'd like to see perhaps some input from forestry. I mean, if we're anticipating, you know, pressure on the roots is going to kill a tree 10 or 15 years down the road, you know.
Yeah, what's the statute of limitations? I hear you.
Right. How long are we doing it?
Right.
I think the thing to do, in my opinion, is, you know, let's make sure everyone is adhering to the guidelines that forestry has already provided in terms of boulevard and tree protection, so that the damage doesn't get done. And if we find I don't think it would be that hard to find an effective way to police the bad actors. You know, whether it's some kind of a hotline or it's, you know, there are inspectors circulating around these mature neighborhoods constantly. They could take a picture and phone it in.
Thanks, Mr. Graham. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor McKean now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bertrand, my memory of this is that EPCOR actually did some public engagement in a Westmount context where there was some trees that had to be trimmed because of overhead power lines. So my point is, to put this in context, do you actually do your due diligence if you've got to impact trees? Yes?
Yes, there's certain areas where in the Westmount case, there were some mature trees there that were getting tangled up into some power lines. And we had some noted residents that had raised some concerns about that situation. And so we did consult with them about why we do this, the safety of the public around the tree, and what we're going to do with that tree in terms of the tree trimming with our contractors.
So I know of another example in an infill tower where, unfortunately, at the very end of construction, a subcontractor in doing a sidewalk work cut through the roots of a very, very old tree, 60, 80-year-old tree, and essentially doomed it. So, Mr. Bertrand, we're talking about contractors and subcontractors, and Mr. Phillips, I don't know if you want to add anything here too, but there has to be good information and education of subcontractors too, because we need, if we don't go with the permitting system, we need to hold people to account to do good work so the trees aren't damaged. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'm going to, again, back to Guillaume. You deal a lot with our contractor community.
Yeah, so I fully agree. And I think we already, in our contract, will reference the city policy, the corporate tree management. We'll put the requirement when we do the beginning of project. We look at the plan from contractors. The plan are also submitted through the ULA process. So we do, like, there might be exception. And I think the point you're raising, it's not impossible that at some point there would be an event that could occur, but I think we do the education piece, we do put it as part of our contracts as well as a requirement, like the use of snow fencing and so on and so forth when you work in proximity to trees. So, yeah.
I was just going to say because the consequence might be that there's a press release going out saying EPCOR or Shaw or TELUS or somebody was fined X thousands of dollars for that work, because if we go along with the no permit solution, but we go with a higher fine, say, then there's consequences either way, is I guess my point, which leads me to you, Ms. Samji. There's already a lot of permits that go into infill development. I get that, and it's cumbersome and stuff. I'm just wondering if this wouldn't just fit within the OSCAM and other things, and wouldn't actually add much in the way of time or delay or labor for the developer, and could in fact be streamlined in a way that it wasn't. I want infill developers to know their responsibilities when it comes to public trees. And you tell me, like, there's either we do a permit or they've got to sign off in a document that says they understand their roles and responsibilities to protect public trees, and if they violate X, Y, or Z, they might be subject to a fine. Is that what do you prefer?
So we've talked to administration. We'd like to see if we go down the road of creating more process, that it's aligned with current processes that we already have. So we're not creating new streams. We're not needing significant additional resources that we know will lead to extra timelines. We're not needing overly expensive plans to help protect the trees when the majority of people are already doing it right. We'd like to see those resources go to the bad actors that are giving everyone a black eye.
Right.
So we've talked about it at the board. We're comfortable with the fines being higher. We're not comfortable with an extra $2,500 per project when small scale and medium scale infill doesn't have high margins.
Yeah.
I know that it was talked about before, but companies like Dialogue work with large scale projects. It's not the same.
And the last thing I would say, I suspect this report came back not from administration, but because of some activism at the council level. We were getting a lot of pushback. And so that's why this report is here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKean. On the second round, I'll start with Councillor Henderson.
Great, thanks. Just to follow up with Mr. Vachon, because the process that you were describing at the end of my last questions, which is that if you're going to be going in and putting a tree at risk and any of those kind of things, you're going through the city anyway. Sounds to me like a permitting process. That sounds to me like you're already, and I don't understand why enshrining that. Understanding that I think the volume piece where there isn't risk and all those kind of things probably could be dealt with in a kind of blanket way. But giving the city a chance to weigh in where there is going to be some risk. But it sounds to me like that doesn't add onus to what you're already doing. Am I missing something?
So I think as far as doing the right thing, it's already happening, and we will work with the forestry team when there's a tree that needs to be removed or something like that.
Yeah, or put at risk, I assume.
Yes. So where this process currently in the form that it's presented is a concern is that there would be an addition of a permit for any work done within 5 meters of a tree, which means a lot of work, a lot of permits being requested, and delays potentially to be able to do the service.
Just so my guess is though, and because I think there's talk about maybe for some of the big operators doing a blanket piece that might say you do the blanket, but any place where there's risk, you have to go through the city, which is something you're doing already, correct?
Yeah, that would be right, and wouldn't be a huge concern if we can find, but we just haven't seen anything like that at this point, right?
Yeah, and that's part of I think why we're here, because I think there's some nuance that I suspect they were wanting to hear back from this discussion. And then I guess to Mr. Graham is the best. One of the things that I'm reading in this is there's a difference between a tree protection permit and a tree preservation permit. So if you're driving over the boulevard, if you're protecting the trees, that's the tree preservation thing. And I didn't see that as needing an arborist. The tree preservation thing, which is when you're excavating. And I raised that question. So already that distinction's in what they're proposing. And I raised that question because we've seen a number of DC2s where we've needed the arborist to sign off because there's excavation going very close to the roots and there's trimming that has to happen. And that seems to me is not unreasonable for the city to be able to weigh in and to come up with the rules to protect its own property. And I wouldn't mind your thought on that. And then the tree preservation thing is just about ensuring and enforcing best practice, but I'm not seeing the need for an arborist on that. That distinction's in the proposed bylaw, correct?
Yeah, but it's pretty vague. I'd like to see a little more clarity there.
Okay, fair enough.
Usually an excavation won't come within 5 meters of a mature tree, but if it's an 80-year-old tree, that root structure will have spread out an awfully long way. The other question that I have is, there's a value assigned to an 80-year-old tree, but I don't know if it takes into account the tree's natural lifespan. trees don't live forever. And I'm wondering if that graph starts to decline.
Given some of our bad practice, I'll just maybe share and maybe your thoughts on this, because we lost that entire stand of trees at not even close to 80 years of age along White Avenue. Those have a 200-year lifespan. And that's what most of our tree stock is, and that's because we were careless, quite frankly, in how we rebuilt White Avenue. So, and some of this is knowledge and some of this is practice, and that's why I just wanted to talk about that tree preservation preservation piece, because it does seem to me there's an expertise that's needed there that may not be self-evident to everybody, even with the best intentions. And if we can have a process that forces people to actually get an expert to tell them how to work around the roots, how to work around the branches, that seems to me is a plus for everybody.
I have no argument with that. My concern is, these things, I don't know if it's the lawyers on the city team that get involved, but this always seems to turn into a risk mitigation argument. And what that inevitably means is more expert input, which adds more cost. So, I'd like to see some guardrails around this, clearly defined. I deal with consultants all the time.
But I'm puzzled. When it's complex, it seems to me getting the experts in has value for anybody, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm out of time again. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Beiger.
Thank you. Just a couple more questions. Ms. Kowalczyk, it appears like you've been patiently waiting. I'm going to let you figure out in this discussion. Anyway, my question to you is, if there's any damage to any city property, whether it's a bridge, sign, tree, or whatever else it is, the offender basically either get fined or the damage, they're liable for the damage. In this proposed your proposed sports towards the anticipated bylaw, that we should have permitting in process. What do you think it will improve?
Well, I think a distinction has to be made between damage to a city sign and a city tree, right? As Councillor Henderson brought up, how do you evaluate the value of a tree? And I think it's a lot more than, the $1,000 figure that's been thrown out for a mature tree. How do you actually quantify this? Trees have enormous value in terms of the ecosystem services they provide. But they also provide aesthetic and spiritual value, and we know that they benefit our well-being. And we are just starting to understand scientifically the extent of that. So, we really need to be careful here. I've also seen, in the example that I gave on my street of those two 70-year-old ash trees on the boulevard that died adjacent to an infill development, there were no fences or boxes or anything put around those trees. Because the ERVCC was part of the stakeholder group that was working with, the urban forestry planners, I knew about this 5-meter, protection zone that was required, and learned a lot from I guess it was the Alberta Mycological Society, who was also part of that group, and they talked about the danger to compacting tree roots. And I went out to talk to the developers when they were there, and they said, they just shrugged and they said, we'll pay the fine. We don't really care about these trees, and we're happy to pay a fine afterwards. And so, the trees ended up dying, both of them. And, I'll send in a photo to council that shows those two dead trees right in front of that house. So I think that really what is needed here is great public education on the value of trees. I don't think that's widely understood yet in this city. And frankly, we are lagging behind. There are so many other cities across Canada that have this kind of bylaw and include permits as part of the bylaw. And I think, you know, as a biophilic city, we just need to step up. You know, we're talking about modernization of you know, river valley planning and things, and you know, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis. This only makes sense. In this day and age, we need this kind of system.
Okay, so if there is damage to a root of a tree and it's not apparent right away, how do you think that should be handled in the whole process thing there in the bylaw, if there's one?
That, I guess, would be a question for the planners to look at, you know, what happens in other cities. I think that, you know, we can look at best practices elsewhere and learn from that.
Okay. And my last question to you is, as you heard from many speakers today, that some said they're 100% compliant, and some said they're 98% compliant. To you, does it seem like a big problem?
It definitely seems like a big problem. I mean, we heard an administration study about the 196 work sites between 2019 and 2021 alone that had caused damage to trees. We've all seen the damage to trees across the city. This is a huge problem, and it really is, you know, what is being proposed is absolutely reasonable. There's nothing extreme about it. It's just that, you know, the protection that makes sense for the trees in our city. I will say, I also liked what Mr. Beiger had to say about, you know, trees being part of the culture of this city. And I know that, you know, when I've had visitors come to visit here in Edmonton, they've talked about, you know, how amazing it is to see elm trees on our boulevards and in other places. I mean, this is one of the cities that has, you know, really beautiful mature trees. We absolutely need to protect them. It's in our own best interest, including in, you know, the utilities' best interests, and including in the developers' best interest to protect those trees.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, all the questions have been asked by council and committee. So thank you to all the speakers that have joined us today. We are now going to turn our attention over to questions of administration. I'll start with Councillor Henderson, and everyone else will please sign in.
There's a number of things. Maybe to start, I'm wondering what our thinking is in terms of this idea for the utility companies of some kind of blanket permission, which obviously, if it was abused, you could withdraw. And I suppose it wouldn't just have to be for the utility companies. You could also do it for certain, and whether or not we make reference to the possibility of that. And I'm wondering what our thinking is, understanding that again there may be a difference between the tree protection piece and tree preservation piece, where work has to be done that begins to create risk. You might still want to keep a permitting process in place, even for the utilities, which it sounds like they're doing already. So thoughts about that?
So, Councillor, I'll just speak to it a bit and then have the team give a bit more detail. In terms of different applications for permitting, being individual permits and, say, annual permits, depending on the type of use and the type of work and the frequency, we certainly heard that during the engagement and realized that as we develop the permit process, that's something we want to consider and take into account how we minimize the impact, you know, for the people that are doing it more, they're probably, you know, more in tune with what the requirements are and can certainly take advantage of an annual type of permit or a blanket type of permit. Whereas the ones that are doing more one-off projects that are a little more specialized, that's where there's the individual permits that require a little bit more attention. But I'll ask Mr. Kennedy to just provide a little more detail on that.
Thanks, Gord. I'll expand a bit here. So a blanket annual permit will be issued every year for work involving routine infrastructure maintenance or emergency work. Applicants will identify the nature of work to us during the application, and they can submit a standalone preservation or protection plan that would apply to all the types of projects within that category that they'll be participating in a given year. So I'm just going to go through a list of examples. That includes emergency repairs for companies like utility, excavation for maintenance of utility infrastructure when access is restricted to existing roadways and improved trails adjacent to a city tree, directional boring that passes through 5 to 10 meter radius at a depth of about a meter below grade, vegetation clearing along right-of-ways for surveillance, and preventative line maintenance, including light poles. So these categories are what we're going to continue to work on, and we've had initial and secondary discussions with our utility companies to make sure that it's seamless and that a blanket permit can cover that. The quantities we were hearing are thousands of permits, but from our perspective, we'll capture those thousands of permits in a handful of permits that we can issue on an annual basis.
Right, and if there were truly exceptional circumstances where a tree had to be removed, or that those would have to stand, those would get carved out?
Yes, so if it's yes, Councillor Henderson. If it's a large-scale project that requires a more comprehensive preservation plan, then we would actively engage with those companies to develop that and issue approval for the larger potential impact.
Now, would we just distinguish utility companies or larger scale home builders? Would that also apply to them or not?
Councillor, I think right now we started with the concept of utility companies, but we could see, more frequent activities that are happening on an ongoing regular basis. Utilities are kind of the starting point. And I think what we want to be really cognizant of is that as we learn more about this, there'll be more people that are probably impacting the potential for tree damage, but aren't maybe aware of it. So as we educate, we would likely look at how we could maybe bring more of those people into the fold.
But we could do something where people with proven track records, could have a different process theoretically, I presume.
I think that's an option, certainly as people, again, become more accustomed to whatever we implement. As they have a proven track record, then we would have certainly less risk and we would need less oversight, but we would still want to be able to have that mechanism in place.
And can you talk a little about, because and it makes sense, whether the difference between the tree protection and the tree preservation. So the tree protection is you want to stop the backhoe from backing into the tree. You want to make sure that boulevard's protected if people are driving over it. Tree preservation, I presume, is if there's roots being cut or the potential for roots to be cut, or if there's a need for trimming to be done. And those are the situations where we would want to have expertise to look at it, correct?
I'll ask Mr. Kennedy to answer that.
Yeah, I'll just take a moment to explicitly explain them. So a tree protection plan is required for work activities limited to a temporary crossing or laydown areas. It includes basic details, protection distance from the trees, and the installation of physical barriers for trees and their root zones, access points and property lines. Anyone can write this plan, and we'll have templated files that can be pulled by applicants that are approved by the city to make the process easy for them. A tree preservation plan is more complex. It's required for work activities including ground excavation, grade changes, aerial or ground activities, and provides guidelines to a worksite conditioner practices that must occur on site prior to, during, and after work has taken place. These guidelines and practices must be provided or reviewed by either an arborist or landscape architects or another discipline as approved by the city. So much more comprehensive work required with the preservation plan. Majority of these infill type applications where it's simple boulevard crossing, really they fall into the tree protection plan requirements, which is a templated file we have available.
Great, thanks. I'm out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Beiger.
Thank you. So again, distinguishing between preservation and protection. So please correct me if I'm wrong. When we're talking about preservation, it is definitely a plan is being submitted at this time by a developer, right? And if there is some kind of construction activity going on or about to go on.
That's correct. Go ahead, Travis. I think you wanted to add.
Yes, for the most part, Councillor Beiger, it'll be larger scale project sites. So, infrastructure works or large scale, high rise downtown where there's, multiple trees potentially impacted, city trees. That's where you'll need a more comprehensive plan in place to ensure preservation. It's much greater than a single crossing.
So please put me at ease. What would this new bylaw and the permitting process would do?
Sorry, could you just repeat the last part of your question, Councillor?
Yeah, what would this, suggested bylaw and the permitting process would do to, address those concerns?
So the bylaw itself is the mechanism to enforce. I think that's what we currently don't have. The permitting process is the process of delivering the controls and the ability to monitor and enforce. So the permitting process is probably where the more conversation is being generated in terms of how we go about delivering that. And we're certainly cognizant of the fact that, anybody that's doing work, we don't want to add more red tape. We don't want to inconvenience them. We want to make the process as smooth as possible, but still we do need some form of process to ensure that the bylaw is being adhered to.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you the same question I was asking from the speakers. It's when we are talking about damage to any trees, I guess in a lot of instances, it's not noticeable right away. So how do we address, if something develops in a year or 2 years or whatever, would there be a statute of limitations in there?
Councillor Beiger, I can respond to this. I think what this bylaw and permitting fee will help us do is to be proactive and to educate and make everyone aware of what's required before construction practices begin. So our goal here is really not to chase the tail, to come later on and find a dead tree and then try to walk backwards in time. Our goal here is really to bring the community along in protection of our city assets by having ourselves present up front and things like templated protection available online. This will kind of increase the capability, experience, and education of the proponents so that they can help us protect this well before we need to chase down the cause or damages. In the case where we do start to see damage showing in the 1 to 2 year period, we do have the ability to pull records and see maybe what has gone wrong and talk to folks about addressing and potentially preventing things like this in the future. Okay, so as far as this, education and awareness is concerned, why can't it be done right now, or is it being done right now? We do have pretty comprehensive community programs in place, and we do our best to educate both stakeholders in industry, as some of the speakers have mentioned today, as well as our greater community. I think what we're talking about here today is, upping the game overall and having a greater level of support from proponents. So we will be offering comprehensive communications so folks know where to go, where to find the details on what's required, and they can help us protect our city assets. Thank you. Sounds great.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Katarina.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Seabrook, what I just understood through that questioning there is that one of your biggest concerns or issues is enforcement, that you don't have the ability to enforce, to be proactive on this. And the permit fee is in order to gather those resources or to have resources in place. Is that what I understood that? That's how I understood it.
So you're on the right track. I think what the permit fee does is it allows us to deliver the dimensional components of this program. So there is the enforcement, there is the education piece, there is the actual oversight, in terms of providing the expertise with arborists and those types of things. Again, we've looked at what other jurisdictions are doing and where their shortfalls were in terms of being able to deliver the programs. And I think really it came down to the ability to have a bylaw but also to be able to enforce and educate. So the permit fee itself is intended to support that. And right now it's based on some engagement as well as jurisdictional survey, but it isn't nailed down. We've given a couple of ranges in terms of what that could look like, but we haven't finalized anything yet.
Right, and as you heard with some of the concerns today, there's a lot of information that's missing out of this and nuances to the different businesses, industries, good actors, bad actors, all sorts of things. So this seems to me that you're asking for, if the number is true or correct, you want 98% of people doing a good job to pay a fee in order for you to enforce that 2% that's doing a bad job. That's my understanding. And if that's the case, what is the budgetary requirement that you would need? Have you got a number in mind that you would need to enforce this? Forget the permit fee right now. But if this problem is so important, have you got a package coming forward to budget in order to argue that point? That you need X amount of funds in order to be proactive and enforce this rather than a permit fee penalizing virtually everyone for a few bad actors out there.
So, Councillor, we haven't put together a package yet for budget because we don't know exactly where this is going to go. Based on the conversation and direction that we would get out of today's session, we would look towards that in the fall. But right now, it's trying to get a sense of the direction we want to go. Do we want to have a bylaw? And the permit fee, certainly there's options in terms of how much we cover and how much we want to do. I think the intent with the permit fee was also, again, to address the services that would be required to deliver this. And again, it's not just enforcing the bylaw, it's the educational and proactive component, because when we talk about if we consider trees an asset.
Yeah, Mr. Seabrook, sorry to cut you off there. I think everybody understands, and from what I've heard, everybody agrees that we should protect trees. They're extremely valuable and on and on. But what I also heard from the majority of people today that are going to be paying that fee is that it's not necessary and they're not in favor of it. So you already have the indication of the stakeholders in this, the majority of them. Certainly, I think you've got my perception of this bylaw, and I think it's unnecessary at this point in time. And if you need resources, don't use the permit fee as the reason to gain that enforcement. Use the budget process and ask us for it and make your argument at budget time that this is extremely important. I think it's giving you that. So in saying that, if this was referred back to deal with the stakeholders, those people you've heard today, and work out all these details so there are no question marks on who, what, how much, and then come forward, then come back with a proposal rather than this one that seems awfully blanketed with very little information for the stakeholders to actually even understand. And they've been working with you for 3 years. Imagine us here with 3 hours trying to get a head around why you're making the suggestions that you're making.
So, Councillor, your point's well taken. And again, the intent was to come today to provide council with an update and stakeholders an opportunity to speak. We know that there's more work that has to be done engaging with stakeholders in terms of nailing down what that process would look like, and then coming back through the budget process. So it wasn't intended that today is to be the final sign off and then we move forward. Today was the check-in with council or with committee and an opportunity for stakeholders to speak so that we can go back and do that next body of work so that we can come back with the complete package of what that would look like for a process, a bylaw, and any accompanying budget requirement.
Madam Chair, can I ask one short question instead of going to another round?
Is this on referral or?
No, I just receiving this for information means what, Mr. Siebert? That you will go back and look at these issues with the stakeholders before you come back with a proposal.
Our intent is there's more work to do. Certainly, if there was a motion at the end of today's discussion giving us some more specific direction, that would be appreciated. The more direction we have, the clearer it is, and I think the better chance we have of getting everything aligned properly for council's consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just have a couple of follow-up because I interpreted receiving for information, you'll take what you heard today and that you will incorporate it into the next presentation that you come back. Was that not correct?
That's correct. I think where I'm going with, if council or committee gave us a motion, it may give us a bit more specific direction than what we were already doing. But our intent was to come back following more work with stakeholders in industry.
So you heard from the utility companies today, and I think what I heard Mr. Kennedy say, that's kind of the work that you're considering, these blanket, but you've heard a bit more, it's not clear enough. So that would be part of what you came back with, how that would work for those large blankets exemptions. Is that right, Mr. Kennedy?
That's correct, Councillor.
Okay, so that piece is taken care of. The other item is whether we have permit fees. And when I read the document, you really wanted to try to avoid additional time, but it was a fee. And my other question is about fines. So if I have a permit and I don't meet the requirements, now I've damaged a tree, what happens to me? I had a permit to do it, but I got the tree and I've damaged it. Do I get a fine now?
Councillor, that's correct. If there's a contravention on site against the approved plan, the proposed bylaw has a $500 maximum fine on the first day of the incident. If remedy can't be made by the second day, then we would issue a secondary fine on top. Tree damages themselves impact asset value as well, so that's something to consider. But like I was saying earlier, our goal here is that education around preservation is community built, and that they'll be doing that protection in advance because they pulled the permit. They'll know how to properly protect these trees to prevent those damages.
And I appreciate that, but you know, sometimes people opt to pay a fine rather than really do the work. So a fine has to be large enough to be a deterrent, and I don't know if $500 is large enough to be a deterrent in this situation, because we can't replace that tree. If it's really damaged and it dies, we don't have another 20, 30, 40 years to replace it. So I don't know if 500 is enough. Is part of the next piece of work going to deal with private property? Because that's the next piece. We have public property, we're dealing with time. Is that a further conversation that's on your radar already?
Councillor, I think we know that, you know, trees on private property also have a big contribution to the natural canopy within the city. But in terms of where we go with private property, we haven't contemplated that in detail. I think the first order of business was to get the city's house in order on public property. And then based on that, we would look at direction from council. I might ask Ms. McCabe, if she's in on the call, just to comment a little bit about the private property piece.
Good morning, committee. At this point, we do not have policy direction or intend to bring in at this point policy direction on protection of trees on private property.
Okay, so it's not on the radar yet, because I think that's what we're going to have to go to eventually, because I think that's one of the challenges we're faced on, particularly these large historic trees. My other question is, Mr. Richmond made a few comments about whether a biologist should be included, some additional items under attachment 6. Have you taken that information and for consideration as you go forward? I mean, he's made some suggestions. Did we record those and are taking those forward to consider?
Yes, we have. I think P biologist is in the mix with the approved designations at this point, Councillor Essinger.
Okay, I think those are all my questions. We'll go to Councillor Cartmell.
Thank you. Just very quickly, with respect to trees on private property, you haven't got anything in the works yet, so you would need something by way of a motion out of today to at least examine protection of trees on private property related to development projects. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, Councillor Cartmell, I know administration has explored this in the past quite extensively through 2015, 2016, and at that time there was decision to not proceed with as a result of the increased costs to protect trees on private property. But if it was the will of committee for us to explore what we've done to date and look at this, we'd be happy to do that, of course, if that was the will of committee. At this point, it's not in our work plan for this year. We've got a number of other major projects underway, but we could explore what has already been done for committee if that was your desire.
Well, I'm not a member of committee, so I guess I'll have to try to influence my friends that are on committee to have a bit of a look at that, because those are the complaints I get, quite frankly. It's not generally speaking from utilities, it's from the scar in the neighborhood that comes from that bad actor on the infill project. The other question I had was, have we explored the deposit idea? So this is something that greenfield developers do all the time. It's consistent with industry where they have to provide a deposit which is returned to them should they deliver their landscape plan properly and all the life that they're planting continues to live within a year or two. Have we thought about that? A deposit per tree that's refundable should the tree live through the project?
Councillor, it certainly has merit. That methodology is certainly used quite significantly in development, and I think there might be potential. I don't know. I'll ask Mr. Kennedy to comment in regards to if we've seen that in other jurisdictions and if they've examined it.
Yeah, Councillor Cartmell, we haven't looked extensively at that option. At this point in time, we were looking to keep our costs on proponents to an absolute minimum by using kind of the templated approach, exploring things like mobile check-ins with builders with a smartphone, very, very kind of simple ways for us to drive those costs down without kind of extending or making the process more than it needs to be. So right now it's just we're focused on making sure it's very efficient, and that's the next stage of this process, is to really look at service delivery with our proponents and stakeholders and make sure it makes sense and they're okay with it.
I appreciate that tension, Mr. Kennedy, from a red tape perspective and a cost perspective. So I'm, just trying to thread a way through this conversation, but trying to transfer the financial incentive to be preserving the tree as opposed to the potential financial incentive to be ignoring the tree and suffer the consequences later. And a deposit system, I think, might help with that. I think it's at least something we could potentially explore.
Councillor, I think we can explore that. Definitely, it does, as you mentioned, have merit in terms of encouraging those construction and maintenance projects to place a little more emphasis on care of the tree.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And I just want to mention to committee, we have till noon today, and then we will not pick up until after the special city council meeting. So we might be able to extend a few minutes to finish, but I just want to put that on your radar, seeing 3 more speakers and 12 minutes. But I will go to Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, on the scale of the problem question, I just want to, because this number 9,000 has been bandied about, but we're only talking about needing to pull a permit in places where there is a city tree, correct? And that's not 9,000 development permits. It can't be, I'm guessing it's a very small portion of that. Am I correct? Do you have numbers on that?
Councillor Henderson, for those 196 sites where we found kind of contraventions or damage, those sites were inspected because they were linked to the 700 crossing permits were issued, of which 300 of those sites required tree protection plans. Okay, so those 300 sites, 196.
We had 198 out of 300.
Yes, on the permits that were required.
So that's much closer to 70% than it is to 2%, correct?
Correct.
So for places where trees need protecting, we still got a big problem here. And what you want to do here, I think, and this is the thing we need to understand, is to be proactive, which means making sure people know what they should be doing before they go in, rather than going oops after the fact and us having to go in and put a fine on.
Correct.
And the best way to do that is to make sure that they've thought about it, which is all the permitting process is designed to do, is make sure that the question's been asked and they've gone out and got the expertise to make sure the damage doesn't get done, correct?
Correct.
So how many permits, taking the utility companies out of it, so how many permits do we think we'd be doing in a year? My guess is it's probably not in the 9,000 range, it's probably more in the 500 range, correct?
I think we're estimating it to be a fair bit higher than that, but still in the range of 2,000 to 3,000 permits citywide. These are still estimates. We really don't have a firm grasp on it at this point, outside of knowing that with the utility companies, we're going to be moving to blanket permit issuance.
Yeah. I mean, taking those out of it. So, and most of those will be the tree protection plans. I'm guessing the tree preservation plans is a much smaller number, correct?
Yes, correct, absolutely.
But that's probably even more important with the tree preservation plans, to be proactive, to make sure that everybody has good expertise before they put that backhoe in the ground.
Correct.
Or changes drainage or any of those kind of things. Just in terms of the things that Mr. Richmond was rating, the biologist, would that be included, or is that just a question of adding that in? And that's about natural tree stands, which is a different issue here. Is there any reason why that would not be considered acceptable? It maybe needs to be named, but
it is named. I just need to find the reference document,
okay.
Councillor Henderson. We've heard this feedback and we've addressed it. I just can't cite the specific passage right now.
Yeah, because the idea is to make sure that the right people with the right expertise, and is broader than just one specific expertise.
For sure, natural areas are
already changed. That's one of the things you heard in the What We Heard stuff.
Yeah.
The idea of an emergency number.
So we haven't jumped on that yet, but certainly it's something for consideration. We do have, on projects, when we talk about specific projects, we do have contact information. I think we would just need to maybe look at how we could incorporate that into 311 so it has a higher priority.
Yeah, one way or the other, I've had a number of instances where it's been days later when it's actually the messages got through, and days is the end of the tree. So I actually do think a way, whether it's an emergency number or a way to get through quickly, is probably something we need to look at. And I also would be inclined to think that I would think if the NGOs are out there, why we wouldn't bring them in as a kind of quick win. I'm also puzzled by, because they're probably ready to go on all of this. And why did that get pushed back?
I think we were focusing in on priorities for launch of the permitting system in those early 5. What do we need that's fundamental to launch? But absolutely agree. Education and NGOs are a key piece of this. And that's what we learned when we talked to other municipalities. The greater the education, the greater the engagement on the street, the less damages occur in the first place. So
in terms of next steps, this is sort of getting referred back anyway, because this was for information only, but getting some more definition on how the blanket permits would work. And I think we heard also some questions about greater clarity about when the tree protection plan is needed, when the tree preservation plan is needed. Those are things, if we're going to send it back, is it useful to name things, or is that work that you would do anyway?
I think based on the feedback and the conversation we've had today, we would do that work and include those changes and updates.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm out of time again, but great, thanks.
Thank you, and I think Councillor Katarina has a referral motion to name some things, but we'll see when he gets there. Next item would be Councillor Beiger.
Madam Chair, I would let Councillor Katrina go first.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Katarina.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Seabrook and Councillor Hansen just asked you that question. You've heard the concerns today. So if this was received for information, you would actually take those concerns and address them before you came back? Or you still prefer for things to be named or to be more specific? I think you've got the gist or the issues that have come up.
Council, we definitely have heard, the concerns and the feedback, and that was the whole intent of today, was to get that so we can revise and come back with more comprehensive work for council to consider. It would be entirely up to the committee if they would like us to have more direction. If not, we are prepared to go and do the work and return back at a later date.
Okay, so I'm going to give you the benefit. I don't know if you've seen the referral motion that I have. Can you tell me before I actually put it on the floor if this would be helpful for you, or under receiving for information is better? So that the May 25th, 2021 City Operations Report, CR 6801, be referred back to administration to engage with industry stakeholders regarding permit review, site inspection capacity, managing and permitting program, and other related concerns. Would that be more helpful or not as a referral?
I think that I would just make the amendment to say administration to complete engagement, so that we're moving towards an end point as opposed to just continuing.
Yeah. That is a fair amendment, and I would include that to come to some sort of conclusion when you come back with the proposal, that we all actually have specifics, and that I'm not saying 100% agreement from all stakeholders, but at least explanations that they have no questions on how the process is going to unfold.
Yes.
So, Madam Clerk, if you could add that amendment, I'd like to put that on the floor at this point. Thank you.
Do you want to read that motion in once we have it, Councillor Katarina?
Whatever you would like, Madam Clerk.
Go ahead.
That the May 25th, 2021 City Operations Report, CR 6801, be referred back to administration to complete engagement. So that's the amendment, to complete engagement with industry stakeholders regarding permit review, site inspection capacity, managing and permitting program, and other related concerns. Due back August 24th, 2021.
Okay, anything else, Councillor Katarina? I'll entertain questions on the motion now.
Yeah, no, that's the motion, Madam Chair.
So Councillor Beiger, did you have any questions on this now, or are you okay?
I do have a question. Mr. Seabrook, this motion as it's being put forward, do you think we need more engagement with not just the stakeholders from the industry side, but we need more engagement with all the stakeholders?
Councillor, you raise a good point, and I think it would be more inclusive to complete any engagement with the other stakeholders if required. If the other stakeholders are at a point where they're comfortable with where we're at, we would certainly welcome that. I think the only thing I would suggest is that we potentially move the date up. Well, I guess that would be fine. We would work towards that date because of the break in the summer.
So to the mover, if I may suggest, I think we should take the word out industry.
Yeah, my intent was all stakeholders, not specifying one or the other. All stakeholders need to be satisfied at some point with the process and the recommendation, whether it's permit fee or not at this point. So, yeah, or exemptions or so. Yeah, you can remove industry and just leave it as stakeholders would be friendly to me.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Beiger?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Great. Councillor Henderson, I'm going to you next. I need a motion to extend to finish this item. I have 2 speakers left.
I'm happy to move to extend. I will have subsequent on the private tree piece on behalf of Councillor Carmel. So, but I'm okay, I think, over the lunch break. So I'm happy to move to extend if we can get it done.
Okay, I'm just looking for consensus from my colleagues.
Yes.
Okay, I see that. Yep. I see consensus. I deem that we've passed that. So we'll go to Councillor Henderson then, please.
The one thing I was going to make the same point about stakeholders. The other thing that I heard that I'm wondering is worth mentioning in the motion, because I think it is another specific thing that we need work, is this idea of a blanket permit. And I'm wondering if that should also be mentioned. That was the other big piece, I think, that we said was a piece of work that needs to be clarified. So I'm wondering, Councillor Katarina, if that should get added.
Yeah, I think I asked Gord that question of whether he wanted to be specific, or he's got the all the issues that he's going to be working on. So if Mr. Seabrook, if that helps, then to make that distinction, or you already said that you heard all the concerns, you're going to do this regardless. That's why Councillor Henderson, I worded it that way, that from Mr. Seabrook's understanding of this.
If we're not specific, I'm not sure why we need the motion. That's all. I think we could have just let them go. They've heard, they're going to go and work on all these things. So, Mr. Seabrook, any thoughts on that?
I think, Councillor, I think that leaving it open is better. We do have engagement. We've got the concept of a blanket permit, but we might hear from industry and they might have a different alternative worth consideration. So I think that gives us the flexibility, but we certainly know the intent and we've heard the feedback today.
Okay, then maybe I'll just speak to this quickly if I can. Given that, I think probably we could have received information. You would have gone and done this anyway. I think you're close, and I want to say that out loud. I know others may not agree with me, but I do think the need to do something proactive here so that we can make sure that trees don't get damaged, and it's not just about going in after the fact, I think is important. How we do that in a way that is the least invasive to people who are behaving, I think is the challenge. But I would hate for us to get, clearly we still have a significant problem here. This is not a question of 200 out of 9,000. This is a question of 200 out of probably 500 or 600, to be generous. And that suggests to me that we have a lot of people still not playing by the rules. And I recognize for home builders and for IDEA that there are ways in which they can inform their own members. But and we've known this still in terms of the kind of nightmare we're having with excavations in general, that doesn't get anywhere close to all the builders that are doing stuff right now. And, it's ironically, as disastrous as the excavation question has been recently for some people, it is easier to fix that than it is to repair or save an 80-year-old tree. And I think, I think it is really important that we give ourselves all the tools to do that, because there are still far too many instances. And we have been some of the worst criminals in this, quite frankly. And we've got our game together in ways that we haven't before. We continue improving that. But I think we have to give our foresters as much clout as they have and can to save infrastructure that is very difficult to replace and has extreme value. And if that means a little bit of inconvenience, so be it. Because this is something that is not just about us today. It's about protecting an asset that is for the next generation as much as it is for us. So I think if we can work the wrinkles out and give people some comfort to this, great. And not do things that actually don't add significant value. But I think we need to give ourselves a set of tools to get out there before these problems happen and not just go in and stop people's risks after they happen, or we're going to continue to have this kind of nightmare. So I'm hoping that we can work out the wrinkles, but I don't, from my point of view, I don't want to send the message that I'm unhappy with the work that you've done to date. I think you're getting very close. So I will have a subsequent after very quickly on behalf of Councilor Carmel, but I'll wait for that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Mayor Iveson.
So just, I guess, a couple of thoughts. I had a couple questions, but I think I can wait till this comes back. Maybe just one quick question. Mr. Sedgwick, there was a bit of back and forth on the date. You think that you can get back by August? You were thinking faster. I was wondering if there's further engagement, if you would need more time, but
I think your point's taken. I was hoping to get back before the break, but obviously I don't think we can because the break is coming very quickly. I think we know who the stakeholders are. We've had the ongoing dialogue, so I think we can engage fairly quickly and get back, because as Councillor Henderson said, we're pretty close. We just need to fine tune a bit.
And there have been some good questions here, and I'm not sure. I know Councillor Katarina's expectation is to please everybody. I'm not sure that's possible, but particularly sensitive to the concerns raised by the utility companies. How are you feeling about the likelihood of being able to resolve their concerns?
I think we'll be able to. I think, as Mr. Kennedy alluded to, we were already kind of going down the path of what they were talking about. And I think with a little bit more dialogue with the utility companies, they can have a bit more of a sense of comfort of that we're not going to, put the emergency brakes on their work, that they can still conduct their work, and we can have a level of certainty that the trees will be protected.
And a master permit that's performance-based or something like that, some kind of work.
Performance-based and also assessed on an annual basis, so that the next year, if there's a situation where someone hasn't performed, there's a mechanism to do more monitoring or impose some other constraints around that.
And maybe that's a fit for builders too. I don't want to presume that. I know we've done that in some other areas on the permit side. So not to prescribe, but just to suggest that there, I think the concerns raised are all interesting. They are at odds with each other in some respects between different stakeholders. So to Councillor Henderson's point, just speaking to it now, I do think, and I have been listening throughout the morning here, and good questions and good feedback. I do think there is an inherent tension in the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. But I think if we zoom out just a little bit to think, what do our citizens feel in their heart of hearts around the importance of this infrastructure, and then also as governors and stewards of the city's assets, including our natural assets, what's our responsibility here? And I do think that a mechanism is required. There is a gap here. We need to fill that gap as artfully and smoothly as possible. But we do have an ongoing issue here, and the message hasn't got through to everybody, even though it's gotten through to many who are doing admirable work. And so, you kind of educate for as long as you can until you resort to enforcement and an escalation. I think that's what we're going to have to do here. And we're even doing that, but it's on a reactive basis right now, and that's still not getting the message through to some folks. And so given the biodiversity challenges that we have, given the value of those civic assets, given the importance of protecting trees to our citizens, which are so much a part of the beauty of this city, I think we've got to persevere in this and nail it down as quickly as possible. So I look forward to this coming back later in the year, and appreciate the discussion and all the input from all the different perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just make a couple comments before turning over to Councillor Katarina to close. I too think we're very close, and I appreciate the work that you've done, and knowing this is such important work, because to replace some of those heritage trees isn't we don't have time to do that. So I think trying to find ways to get everybody on the same page and to have a little bit of teeth for those who don't, it's really important. So I appreciate the work that you've done and look forward to this coming back. And I appreciate it'll come back in August and we could finish the loop on this. Councillor Katarina to close.
Madam Chair, I really don't have much else to do to this. I understand the concern for trees from every aspect, as I'm concerned about it as well too. But I think be more specific on the remedies to this and who should be involved or not, whether it's blankets, whether it's exemptions, and that. Those are all questions that should be answered before this comes back to us for a final decision. So with that, I close.
Okay, in that case, please vote.
Madam Chair, yes for me.
Just
I'm
waiting
a
on,
yes to Madam Clerk. I'm spinning here.
perfect, and I'm still waiting on the mayor's vote as well.
Yeah, mine's spinning as well. I'm a yes.
Perfect, we have 5 votes.
And display the vote. And that is carried. And Councillor Henderson with the subsequent.
Yeah, I've just been working on it based on what Councillor Cartmel sent me. I've added a few more things. So the administration, I put it in the chat.
It's on the screen.
No, that's not the final version. I added a few things. That administration provide a report on 1, previous work completed on landscaping requirements for low density development and the effectiveness of those tools, including tree protection and preservation for sites undergoing redevelopment, and 2, other possible tools to protect and or encourage tree preservation on private property. We have had reports on this in the past, but I think we've had some changes in legislation recently that was part of what limited us in the past. Perhaps there's, the city charter may have given us some tools here that we didn't have the last time we talked about this. So we are probably due for another discussion of this. The last discussion, I think really we hit a wall because we didn't have the legislative ability, but we may now have that. And I think it's time to ask those questions again. We are uncommon in Canada not having something around this, which is not about saying that people can't cut down their own trees, but it at least creates a process to look at it and raise it before it happens. So I don't know if you want to fine tune it. I did it fairly quickly based on what Councillor Cartmel sent me, but that's, I think, I may have made a bit of a mess of the first one by adding and effectiveness of those tools to the middle of it, but if it still makes sense, that's fine.
To Ms. Seabrook, Mr. Seabrook, or Ms. McCabe, how are we okay here?
The second part of that motion will be more challenging for us to apply. Yeah. I don't think we can get back by August 24th.
No, and I think that's fine. I don't think it needs to be back. I understand this is a bigger piece of work, but I think it's time to do it again. And if you need our permission to go and raise the question again, we anticipated doing this with the city charter coming in, and we haven't actually asked you to go and do it. So I don't know. Unless somebody else has a strong feeling it has to come back quickly, I think it's a significant piece of work, but it probably is time to say it should start.
So the first point could come back for August 24th. The second point may need another date.
That would be administration's recommendation.
Do you have another date?
Very friendly to me. I suspect you're probably talking sometime next year.
I am, yeah, sometime next year, Q1 or Q2 of next year for the second part.
We can make that change. So the first one would come back August 24th. Second part would come back quarter 1 or 2 of next year.
Yeah. And just to do a double check, I added in the effectiveness of those tools. I think we've had them now for 2 or 3 years. I think it would be useful to know if it's made any difference. But does that make it more difficult to bring it back by the 24th?
It does. I think we could probably do a very high level, I'm not even going to use it, just high level how they're working.
Yeah.
not an in-depth analysis. That does make it a bit more challenging for us.
I think it would just be really useful to know. I mean, we put in something that said that if you kept existing trees, we would let you off the hook for the other trees. I would just be really useful to know if anybody's taken us up on that.
Yeah, understood. I'm sure we could get you at least a feel for those numbers.
I think just knowing if it's it may be too early to know for detailed numbers, but that would be great.
Okay, thank you. The motion is before us. I see no questions. So I will call the question. Please vote.
Yes, for me, Madam Clerk.
We have 5 votes. Thank you.
And display the vote. And that is carried as well. That will conclude item 6.1. Are there any notices of motion? Seeing none, then the Urban Planning Committee is adjourned. Thank you. Great work today.